Christmas morning, Saturday morning, 3rd of December, and excuse me, we're up ready to start the day. Yesterday was another crazy day. We were out virtually the whole day, so it was all a little bit condensed, shall we say, yesterday's Vlogmas, but Hannah had a lovely birthday, which was great. And in the evening, we watched the football and had fun. We had a lovely takeaway and yeah, sat round the fire, which was really lovely. Today is, I think, going to be all about Christmas decorations. Gary has said, can we get the decorations up today? So I think that's what we'll do. I've got to wait for my now 26-year-old daughter to come down from her room. I've just put the kettle on, which is usually a signal that she'll be down for her cup of tea. And I'm already looking, when you look at the phone, I'm looking at the camera, not looking at myself. Should I look at, I don't know. I'm gonna have to watch that. No, I just checked and I'm looking at the right place. Yeah, so we're gonna put some Christmas decorations up. I've started doing the 3rd stitchy ornament, the cross stitch, which I will share with you a bit later as well. I'm behind on my Advent, my Yarny Advent sharing with you, and on my Irina Advent. So I'll share those with you a bit later. We'll be having the next instalment of A Christmas Carol, and hopefully Hannah and I are going to make some mulled apple cider or mulled apple juice. It will be non-alcoholic, but it's something that I wanted to try making this year. I haven't made it before, so I'm going to get the Instant Pot out and find a recipe, and then if it works, she's going to take the Instant Pot into her office where she works a week after next, I think, because they fancied having that at the office as well. So I said if we can make it a nice recipe, then she could take the ingredients to work and they can have it in the office for their Christmas celebration day, few days they have, because let's face it, the last week before you give up work for Christmas is like just not doing anything much at all, as I remember rightly. So yeah, that's on the cards for today. Hopefully the dogs will behave themselves. They've had their starring role in the last couple of days, so I think we'll try and keep it more Christmassy. I do have some crafts I want to share and some of the new decorations. Yesterday, I bought a gingerbread house. Not an edible one, it's an ornamental one, and it's so pretty. So I'll show you that later as well. So in the meantime, I'm gonna go and finish making the tea in the hope that the aroma of tea wafts up and draws my daughter down, and then we'll get going. So these are my stitchy ornaments. I would have shown you this on the last podcast for those of you who follow the podcast, the Sheepish podcast. I'm using the Erica Aunt, or Erica Made. Sorry, it's a bit catching the light, isn't it? The 12 Days of Stitchy Ornaments, cross stitch. And I am working on number 3 today because I did do a couple. I'm working on, hang on, that one. Oh, sorry about that. I have done, which I will show you, I've done that one and I've done that one. I knew that the first few days of December would be pretty hectic, so I did a couple last week just to get myself ahead of the game. I'm in my lovely William Morris fabric clear cross stitch case here, and this is today's. That's what, oh, there's a nice bit of dust, you're welcome, with my little gingerbread house needle minder. I've got my little palette out and I've labelled all the colours so they're all ready. And then the two, if I can do this without, we'll change hands. So there you go. So that's the bauble, which I've done. And the other one I've done, it's a Christmas tree. So yeah, really pleased with those. And as you can see, what they will do is they will be set into the little embroidery hoops. I've taken them off for now because they weren't totally centered as I'd like. So I'm going to press around here so that you don't get this line. And then I'll use the hot glue gun and mount them all into the little frames like she suggested. Erica does give you the instructions how to do it in there. And I think there's a tutorial on her YouTube channel. So I'm on day number 3. So I'll aim to get that done by tomorrow. And we're all good. We're on target. While I'm here, I should also show you I have finished both the front and back of my gigantic chunky cushion cover that I'm making on these. Do you remember these? These needles, oh my goodness. So I cast off this morning off number 2, which is this one. I cast off and I ran out of yarn about there. So I undid it and cast off a bit tighter because I think there's still a lot of give in this. And I ended up with that much left. It is amazing. If you cast off and you run out of yarn before the end, just go back and recast off a little bit tighter and you'll be surprised at the difference it can make. Unless, of course, it's socks or to go over your neck, in which case you probably wouldn't then be able to fit the garment. But for a cushion, it's fine. So today, or possibly tomorrow, I'm not sure, I'm going to be joining these two. I love this texture. Oh, just love that. So this is 100% acrylic yarn from Hobbycraft. Really chunky, but knits up really quickly. Does give you a bit of shoulder ache. And hopefully I will be able to make that into a cushion in the next day or two for our new furniture. So I'm going to have a go at making some mulled apple cider. I found a recipe on the internet. I've seen loads, but I'm going to go with this one because I need to use apple juice, because when I bought what I thought would be all the ingredients, I didn't buy apples. Why would you buy apples if you're making apple cider? So I found one that uses apple juice, so I bought a carton of that. We need 2 cinnamon sticks, which I happen to have handy. So I'm going to make these in my Instant Pot and we'll see how this goes. An orange and 4 cloves. So I've got a honking great big bag of cloves here, and I read on one of the recipes they suggest that you actually infuse the cloves into the orange to make it easier to get them out afterwards. So I'm going to do that. Now, Henry's snuffling away at the door because he wants to go back out. Gary's watching the television in the other room, so I closed the door and now of course the dog wants to go out. Okay, orange goes in there. I'm wondering whether I bought cranberries. Shall I add some cranberries? Let's try adding some cranberries. This is the Winterton recipe of trying everything because you got it. So I've just put a little handful of cranberries in there, and I'm going to put a star anise in there as well. I'm not super fond of that, but it's Christmas, you have to have star anise, don't you? Right, so I'm now, what does this suggest? This is an Instant Pot. It's just from a blog I found on the interwebs. Allow it to come to a low boil. I think we could probably do better than that. So, I'll struggle. I'm actually going to pressure cook it. There you go. Hang on. Excuse me, Henry. I'm going to turn it on. Right. And I'm going to give it... see you back here in a bit. Okay, what I also wanted to share with you was my advent box from my wonderful friend Irina, which is so cool. The way she's decorated it. It's just says Nikki's advent calendar. It's Christmas. I love this. Now I think you saw on its from day one was this rather spectacular comedy toilet paper, which I think is brilliant. Yesterday was this lovely fat quarter, which is really beautiful. I love those colours. And look, I've got all these to open. They're all numbered. So I need to find number 3, which I think... there's that. There's number 3. So I'm going to have to put the phone down for now and open it up and come back to you. Oh, my days. Look at that. So let's just come around here. There's my blue fern advent. Look at that. Could that be any more perfect? Irina, you're a genius. Wow. So she knew I was after DK minis. But oh, it's beautiful. It's just the tones I love. And so it goes perfectly with the yarn in my advent. This is good news indeed. Thank you, Irina. So that's it. And it smells pretty good. You might have to ladle some into a cup and give it a try. Stave 1, continuing. Scrooge took his melancholy dinner in his usual melancholy tavern, and having read all the newspapers and beguiled the rest of the evening with his banker's book, went home to bed. He lived in chambers which had once belonged to his deceased partner. They were a gloomy suite of rooms in a lowering pile of building up a yard, where it had so little business to be that one could scarcely help fancying it must have run there when it was a young house playing at hide-and-seek with other houses and forgotten the way out again. It was old enough now, and dreary enough, for nobody lived in it but Scrooge, the other rooms being all let out as offices. The yard was so dark that even Scrooge, who knew its every stone, was fain to grope with his hands. The fog and frost so hung about the black old gateway of the house that it seemed as if the genius of the weather sat in mournful meditation on the threshold. Now, it is a fact that there was nothing at all particular about the knocker on the door, except that it was very large. It is also a fact that Scrooge had seen it night and morning during his whole residence in that place. Also that Scrooge had as little of what is called fancy about him as any man in the city of London, even including, which is a bold word, the corporation, alderman and livery. Let it also be borne in mind that Scrooge had not bestowed one thought on Marley since his last mention of his 7 years dead partner that afternoon. And then let any man explain to me, if he can, how it happened that Scrooge, having his key in the lock of his door, saw in the knocker, without its undergoing any immediate process of change, not a knocker, but Marley's face. Marley's face. It was not in impenetrable shadow as the other objects in the yard were, but had a dismal light about it, like a bad lobster in a dark cellar. It was not angry or ferocious, but looked at Scrooge as Marley used to look, with ghostly spectacles turned up on its ghostly forehead. The hair was curiously stirred, as if by breath or hot air, and, though the eyes were wide open, they were perfectly motionless. That and its livid colour made it horrible, but its horror seemed to be in spite of the face and beyond its control, rather than part of its own expression. As Scrooge looked fixedly at this phenomenon, it was a knocker again. To say that he was not startled, or that his blood was not conscious of a terrible sensation to which it had been a stranger from infancy, would be untrue. But he put his hand upon the key he had relinquished, turned it sturdily, walked in, and lighted his candle. He did pause, with a moment's irresolution, before he shut the door. He did look cautiously behind it first, as if he half expected to be terrified with the sight of Marley's pigtails sticking out into the hall. But there was nothing on the back of the door, except the screws and nuts that held the knocker on. So he said, "Pooh!" and closed it with a bang. The sound resounded through the house like thunder. Every room above and every cask in the wine merchant's cellars below appeared to have a separate peal of echoes of its own. Scrooge was not a man to be frightened by echoes. He fastened the door and walked across the hall and up the stairs, slowly too, trimming his candle as he went. You may talk vaguely about driving a coach and six up a good flight of stairs, or through a bad young Act of Parliament, but I mean to say you might have got a hearse up that staircase and taken it broadside, with the splinter bar towards the wall and the door towards the balustrades, and done it easy. There was plenty of width for that, and room to spare, which is perhaps the reason why Scrooge thought he saw a locomotive hearse going on before him in the gloom. Half a dozen gas lamps out of the street wouldn't have lighted the entry too well, so you may suppose that it was pretty dark with Scrooge's dip. Up Scrooge went, not caring a button for that. Darkness is cheap, and Scrooge liked it. But before he shut his heavy door, he walked through his rooms to see that all was right. He had just enough recollection of the face to desire to do that. Sitting room, bedroom, lumber room, all as they should be. Nobody under the table, nobody under the sofa, a small fire in the grate, spoon and basin ready, and the little saucepan of gruel, Scrooge had a cold in his head, upon the hob. Nobody under the bed, nobody in the closet, nobody in his dressing gown, which was hanging up in a suspicious attitude against the wall. Lumber room as usual. Old fireguard, old shoes, 2 fish baskets, washing stand on 3 legs, and a poker. Quite satisfied, he closed his door and locked himself in. Double locked himself in, which was not his custom. Thus secured against surprise, he took off his cravat, put on his dressing gown and slippers, and his nightcap, and sat down before the fire to take his gruel. It was a very low fire indeed, nothing on such a bitter night. He was obliged to sit close to it and brood over it before he could extract the least sensation of warmth from such a handful of fuel. The fireplace was an old one, built by some Dutch merchant long ago and paved all round with quaint Dutch tiles designed to illustrate the scriptures. There were Cains and Abels, Pharaoh's daughters, queens of Sheba, angelic messengers descending through the air on clouds like feather beds, Abrahams, Belshazzars, apostles putting off to sea in butterboats, hundreds of figures to attract his thoughts. And yet, that face of Marley, 7 years dead, came like the ancient prophet's rod and swallowed up the whole. If each smooth tile had been a blank at first, with power to shape some picture on its surface from the disjointed fragments of his thoughts, there would have been a copy of old Marley's head on every one. "Humbug," said Scrooge, and walked across the room. After several turns, he sat down again. As he threw his head back in the chair, his glance happened to rest upon a bell, a disused bell that hung in the room and communicated for some purpose now forgotten with a chamber in the highest story of the building. It was with great astonishment and with a strange, inexplicable dread that as he looked, he saw this bell begin to swing. It swung so softly in the outset that it scarcely made a sound, but soon it rang out loudly, and so did every bell in the house. This might have lasted half a minute or a minute, but it seemed like an hour. The bells ceased as they had begun, together. They were succeeded by a clanking noise, deep down below, as if some person were dragging a heavy chain over the casks in the wine merchant's cellar. Scrooge then remembered to have heard that ghosts in haunted houses were described as dragging chains. The cellar door flew open with such a booming sound, and then he heard the noise much louder on the floors below, then coming up the stairs, then coming straight towards his door. "It's humbug still," said Scrooge. "I won't believe it." His colour changed, though, when, without a pause, it came on through the heavy door and passed into the room before his eyes. Upon its coming in, the dying flame leapt up, as though it cried, "I know him, Marley's ghost," and fell again. The same face, the very same, Marley in his pigtail, usual waistcoat, tights and boots, the tassels on the latter bristling like his pigtail and his coat skirts, and the hair upon his head. The chain he drew was clasped about his middle. It was long and wound about him like a tail. It was made, for Scrooge observed it closely, of cash boxes, keys, padlocks, ledgers, deeds, and heavy purses wrought in steel. His body was transparent, so that Scrooge, observing him and looking through his waistcoat, could see the 2 buttons on his coat behind. Scrooge had often heard it said that Marley had no bowels, but he had never believed it until now. No, nor did he believe it even now. Though he looked the phantom through and through and saw it standing before him, though he felt the chilling influence of its death-cold eyes and marked the very texture of the folded kerchief bound about its head and chin, which wrapper he had not observed before, he was still incredulous and fought against his senses. "How now?" said Scrooge, caustic and cold as ever. "What do you want with me?" "Much." Marley's voice, no doubt about it. "Who are you?" "Ask me who I was." "Who were you then?" said Scrooge, raising his voice. "You're particular, for a shade." He was going to say "to a shade," but substituted this as more appropriate. "In life, I was your partner, Jacob Marley." Can you sit down?" asked Scrooge, looking doubtfully at him. "I can." "Do it then." Scrooge asked the question because he didn't know whether a ghost so transparent might find himself in a condition to take a chair, and felt that in the event of its being impossible, it might involve the necessity of an embarrassing explanation. But the ghost sat down on the opposite side of the fireplace, as if he were quite used to it. "You don't believe in me?" observed the ghost. "I don't," said Scrooge. "What evidence would you have of my reality beyond that of your senses?" "I don't know," said Scrooge. "Why do you doubt your senses?" "Because," said Scrooge, "a little thing affects them. A slight disorder of the stomach makes them cheats. You may be an undigested bit of beef, a blot of mustard, a crumb of cheese, a fragment of an underdone potato. There's more of gravy than of grave about you, whatever you are." Scrooge was not much in the habit of cracking jokes, nor did he feel in his heart by any means waggish then. The truth is that he tried to be smart as a means of distracting his own attention and keeping his terror down. For the spectre's voice disturbed the very marrow in his bones. To sit staring at those fixed glazed eyes in silence for a moment would play, Scrooge felt, the very deuce with him. There was something very awful, too, in the spectre's being provided with an infernal atmosphere of its own. Scrooge could not feel it himself, but this was clearly the case, for though the ghost sat perfectly motionless, its hair and skirts and tassels were still agitated as if by the hot vapour from an oven.